Arab leaders have gathered in Saudi Arabia for an emergency summit on Gaza. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said his people face a genocidal war and want international protection. Arab nations are expected to issue a joint call for an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. The leaders of Syria and Iran are among those also attending. I'd like to welcome now Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, a Washington, D.C.-based geopolitical risk consultancy. Sir, this is supposed to be an emergency meeting, but it's happening well over a month into the war. So why now?
Well, as the humanitarian disasters in Gaza worsen by the minute, now in Gaza, the death toll has, as of yesterday, surpassed 11,000. It's very clear that this conflict is prolonging, and anger all over the Arab Islamic world is intensifying, and more and more pressure is coming down on governments of all these different countries in the Arab and Islamic world to take some action. And I think the summit in Saudi Arabia today highlighted this.
Can we expect any real outcome from this emergency meeting of Arab and Muslim states?
I am somewhat pessimistic. While I think it was important for these countries to come together and to give a unified call for a ceasefire and for humanitarian aid to Gaza, the fact of the matter is that as long as Israel is receiving support from the United States, it will be able to continue this monstrous bombing campaign of Gaza, which, as I said a moment ago, has resulted in over 11,000 deaths in the besieged enclave. And I'm not so sure that these Arab and Muslim majority countries have the leverage that would be necessary to incentivize Israel to stop. There are, of course, cards that could play when it comes to oil, investments, economic ties with the United States, but I don't imagine these countries playing those cards to try to leverage their influence to pressure the U.S. into pressuring Israel. I don't expect that to happen. I think this is a little bit more about rhetoric than action, unfortunately.
Giorgio, as you surely know, there has been many discussions at this point about other actors in the region getting involved much more deeply than they already are in this conflict. How likely is that to happen?
We can say that the longer that this crisis prolongs, the greater risk there is that the conflict and the violence will spill over into more parts of the Middle East, possibly into Africa. And so that's a very real concern. And when people talk about the need for a ceasefire, it's important to keep in mind what's at stake if there is not a ceasefire. In Washington and many Western capitals, there are very grave concerns about the possibility of Iran getting more involved. I think that's certainly possible, but also I think from Tehran, we've seen quite a bit of restraint. I think the Iranians know that there is quite a bit for their country to lose if it would have some sort of direct all-out war with Israel. So I think the Iranians have certainly been cautious, but to repeat, the longer that this conflict prolongs in Gaza, there is a higher chance of more countries such as Iran and also non-state actors that are tied to Iran, such as the Houthis in Yemen, getting more involved.
The U.S. said the Palestinian Authority should have a role in Gaza and the occupied West Bank when the fighting stops. Is that something the Arab states would welcome?
I think in the region, there's a lot of skepticism about that idea. We know that the Palestinian Authority is seen by many Palestinians and many throughout the region as being just basically partners of the Israeli occupation. The Palestinians do not really see this body as having much legitimacy, and I think it would have many problems if it were to be installed in Gaza. I think among Arab statesmen, there's kind of a view that they want to not bear responsibility for what is going on in Gaza. And additionally, this talk of having Arab forces on the ground in Gaza, I think that's something that Arab states are going to be very opposed to and will do everything they can to refuse any plan such as that.
Our thanks to Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
European leaders have also been speaking about the conflict. France's President Emmanuel Macron has called for ceasefire to ease the suffering of civilians in Gaza. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz urged Israel to abide by the rules of war, but also said it's important Hamas be defeated.
It's necessary for us to show solidarity with Israel after the barbaric Hamas attacks. For us to mutually ensure that Israel, of course, sticks to the rules in the way in which it defends itself. And that is how we see it. And at the same time, we make sure that humanitarian aid can reach Gaza. For that to happen, there can and must be pauses that make it possible for the injured to leave Gaza. But at the same time, it is also right that Israel succeeds in defeating Hamas, as they would otherwise only continue where they left off with the barbaric attacks on children and the elderly in Israel.
Staying with Germany's role in the Middle East crisis, a German foreign minister is in Ramallah to meet with Palestinian leaders. Annalena Baerbock will also hold talks with her Israeli counterpart, Eli Cohen, in Tel Aviv later this evening. The trip comes on the heels of a meeting with Gulf state leaders, including the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Baerbock discussed efforts to free German hostages being held by Hamas, as well as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. This is her third visit to the region since the October 7 terror attacks. Let's go back to DW Special Correspondent Aya Ibrahim in Jerusalem. Aya, the German foreign minister is talking to Palestinian officials right now, we understand. How positive a sign is it that Palestinians themselves are being brought into the shuttle diplomacy revolving around the Gaza conflict?
Well, if we're talking about a larger, more sustainable solution to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, I think there's now recognition that it won't be solved without the involvement of Palestinians. So it's certainly positive that Annalena Baerbock is meeting with officials from the Palestinian Authority as well. However, when it comes to the current airstrikes, war, rockets that Hamas is firing from Gaza into Israel, it's not very likely that the people that Annalena Baerbock met with today can help with that. They simply, the Palestinian Authority has no control over the Gaza Strip. They are, in fact, rivals of Hamas and have not had any control over the Strip since 2007. And so that's not really, the role that she's expected to play with that visit today. However, we've also seen how the U.S. Secretary of State, in a recent visit to the region, meet with officials from the Palestinian Authority, because Israel, the U.S., European allies have said that Hamas cannot be in control of the Gaza Strip once this conflict is over. And so there are now questions, well, can the Palestinian Authority somehow step in and be part of a political future for the Gaza Strip? As a previous guest mentioned, there's a lot of skepticism around that. The Palestinian Authority is oftentimes seen as weak, not very effective, and as also being part of the occupation on Palestinians. But certainly they are an important partner at the moment, and important for Germany to continue involving them in dialogue as we inch closer and closer to the urgency of that question. Well, what happens to the Gaza Strip after the war?
What expectations are the Palestinians likely to have from Baerbock's talks and wider diplomacy in the region?
There is absolutely no expectation that Germany alone is going to be able to solve this. It has to be able to act in concert with European allies and the United States as well. However, Germany is seen, at least among the Palestinians, as siding with Israel, and German officials have iterated time and time again their support for Israel, for its security, for its right to defend itself, and of course its right to exist. These are by no means controversial questions for Germany or German politicians, and so it's not expected that Germany alone will be able to solve this. However, Germany has promised more aid, about 50 million euros more since the October 7th attack to Palestinians. So Germany also plays a really important humanitarian role when it comes to helping the Palestinians.
That is Aya Ibrahim in Jerusalem. Many thanks, Aya. For more, I'm joined now by DW political correspondent Thomas Sparrow, who's here in the studio with me. Thomas, what is German Foreign Minister Baerbock hoping to achieve with this trip?
There are immediate goals that Germany, and by the way, not only Germany has, you will see German leaders, as they've done in the past, speak of humanitarian pauses, not necessarily a ceasefire, but pauses in plural, so that humanitarian aid can reach Gaza. That's one of the sort of immediate goals that the German foreign minister has. But there are more long-term or medium-term solutions. Annalena Baerbock has been speaking of widening the picture of understanding what can happen also in the medium to long term. And that's one of the main reasons why she's also talking to Palestinian leaders. Germany has for a very long time supported the idea of a two-state solution. And from that perspective, it's important to also engage in dialogue, not only with the Israelis, not only with the Palestinians, but also with wider partners in the region. And this explains why Annalena Baerbock is now, once again, traveling to the region.
But how much influence does Germany have?
Aya mentioned it, and I agree wholeheartedly with what she says, because it's not only about Germany itself having an influence in the region. It's about Germany playing a role as part of the EU and as part of the wider international community. So if you ask specifically what role Germany has, Germany plays a rather minor role in itself. But Germany, as part of the wider European community, does indeed play a wider role when it comes to achieving these immediate goals, like finding those humanitarian pauses, but also maybe those medium to longer goals, which also involve the idea of a possible two-state solution, which involve having Israelis and Palestinians live at peace together in the region.
The actors in this conflict, in short, see Germany as a big force within the European Union.
Absolutely, that's the case.
What has Germany's position been since the conflict began?
In fact, Annalena Baerbock describes that as a dilemma, because Germany has very clearly identified itself on the side of Israel. Germany and the German government in particular say they have a special responsibility towards the security of Israel. That's something that they've stated time and time again. Yet at the same time, and we heard that earlier from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, it is becoming more important for Germany and for other European countries to also state that Israel has to abide by the rules of war, and that essentially means respecting civilians. That essentially means allowing humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. So you have these two sides of the story. On the one hand, supporting Israel, a very clear support, but on the other one, also making sure that Israel respects the rules of war in this war. So that is a rather tricky situation for the German government, especially because the German government really from the beginning positioned itself in the side of Israel, and Aya already mentioned that as well. This means that it is necessary also for the German government to explain that position to the Palestinians. So that's also another reason why Annalena Baerbock is doing this right now.
What does the everyday German think about this particular conflict? How worried are they?
They are concerned about the conflict. They are concerned about the war. That's something that, by the way, several polls have revealed, also nationwide polls. And they are not only concerned about what's happening in the region. They're also concerned about possible implications here in the country, here in Germany, because what you're seeing is a lot of tension here among different sides, among different population groups. And you're also seeing an increase in anti-Semitism here in this country. You can imagine that because of Germany's historical responsibility, because of Germany's interest also in the region, any rise in anti-Semitism is something that causes a lot of shock and a lot of alarm. So you're clearly seeing that not only officials, not only the government is trying to make more to deal with that rise in anti-Semitism, but it's also something that's affecting people in this country. And in fact, many have also said in nationwide polls that they're concerned about this increase in anti-Semitism.
DW political correspondent Thomas Sparrow, many, many thanks. And of course, you'll stay with us as we await hearing from the German foreign minister.